Someday Angeline by Sachar. Chapter 14. Mr. Bone is on the phone. Angeline watched the porpoises and dolphins, sea lions and seals all playing together. She pressed her face up against the glass, squashing her nose. It would have looked funny to the dolphins if they noticed, which they didn't. None of the fish ever noticed her. The scissors tail fish cleanly cut their way through the water. The seahorses galloped around the bend. The turkey fish gobbled up their fish food. And beneath the silvery moonfish, the convict fish silently escaped to the other end of the tank. She was on the outside here too, just like at school. Even in the circular room with all the fish swimming around her, she was on the outside. She was in the middle, but on the outside. At school, Gary stood under a tree near where he and Angeline first met. It used to be, before Angeline, Gary didn't have any friends, but he got along fine, telling jokes. Nobody laughed, but so what? The world spun around, and he spun around too. But now he missed Angeline. Without her, his jokes, oddly enough, didn't seem funny anymore. He kicked the tree. He had told it a joke, and it didn't laugh. What did the acorn say when it grew up? Geometry. Gee, I'm a tree. It was even a tree joke. It's not the tree's fault, said Mr. Bone. Gary shrugged. I'm sure Angeline will be back soon, said Mr. Bone. Did you go see her, like I suggested? She's never coming back, said Gary. Oh? He sighed, then told Mr. Bone all about it. He hoped Angeline wouldn't be mad at him, but he told her everything, all about the note from Mrs. Hardlick, and how she'd been going to the aquarium every day. And since she destroyed the note, he concluded, she can't ever come back. He looked sadly at Mr. Bone. Mr. Bone didn't say a word. She just winked at him. The garbage truck pulled into the garbage truck garage. Abel brushed the top of his head and checked in the rearview mirror one last time for banana peels. Mr. Bone, socks, Somaliu. I tell you, Gus, it just keeps getting stranger. I'm almost afraid to go home. What's Somaliu? Asked Gus. I haven't a clue, said Abel. They walked to their cars. Oh, sorry, said Gus, as he purposely stepped on Abel's foot while he secretly placed a banana peel on top of his head. Angeline made herself a glass of salt water and brought it into the living room. The one-eyed pirate brought his prisoners to a secret cove where he tried to think of the best way to kill them. He and his crew laughed and sang ribald songs as they drank rum and brandy. The sailor didn't let on that he had managed to untie the rope around his hands. Abel came home. Don't hug me until I take a shower, he said. Angeline laughed when she saw him. Make sure you wash the banana peel out of your hair, she said. Abel was amazed. More amazed than when she played the piano or beat a computer at chess. She knew about the banana peels? How did she? How could she? It made him feel extraordinarily close to her. He hadn't felt that way in a long time. But then, he felt the top of his head. There really was one. He threw it away in the trash in the kitchen underneath the sink. The phone rang. Angeline watched as he answered it. Hello, he said. Hello, Mr. Persopoulos? It was a woman's voice. Yes? I'm Mr. Bone. I'm a teacher at Angeline's school. He dropped the phone and stared at Angeline. She says she's Mr. Bone, he whispered. It was as if everything imaginary were suddenly turning real. First the banana peel, now Mr. Bone. He retrieved the phone. Uh-oh, mouthed Angeline. Hello, are you there? Hello, said Mr. Bone. Hello, said Abel. I'm sorry we were temporarily cut off, so what can I do for you? He paused. Mr. Bone. I would like to talk to you about Angeline, she said. Abel looked around the room in disbelief. I would like to talk to you too, Mr. Bone. Good, said Mr. Bone. I think it would be better if we talked in person. Perhaps I could come over later this evening? Okay, fine. He gave her directions. Good. I'll see you in, say, 2 hours? Okay, fine. Goodbye. Goodbye, Mr. Bone. He hung up the phone and began talking to himself. That's it, Abel, he said. It's all over. You finally cracked. He took his shower and washed the rest of the banana peel out of his hair. It's no wonder I have banana peels in my hair, he said loudly. My head is full of bananas. Angeline watched him shave. Is Mr. Bone coming over here? She asked him. So she said Abel. She liked to watch her father shave. It fascinated her, the way he scraped the creamy white lather off his face while the hot water steamed up the bathroom. Are you shaving because of Mr. Bone? She asked. Sure, why not? Abel replied. He slapped some aftershave lotion on his face, and also on Angeline's. She shrieked with delight. Oh, it tingles! He put on a clean shirt and a tie, too, for Mr. Bone. "You look so handsome," said Angeline. They were both beginning to feel very excited. Abel took a couple of deep breaths to try to calm himself. "Okay, one last time," he said. "Who is Mr. Bone?" "She's a teacher," Angeline replied. "She teaches Gary's class." "Okay, fine." Angeline didn't know why she was so excited that Mr. Bone was coming over, except that she hadn't seen her for a long time. It only meant that she would get into trouble and would have to go back to Mrs. Hardlick's class. Still, the thought of Mr. Bone coming here to her apartment thrilled her. Abel didn't know why he was so excited either. Maybe it was because Angeline was so excited, or maybe it was because he'd find out who this mysterious person really was, or maybe, he thought, maybe it's because I'm just plain loony. They both forgot all about eating dinner. When the bell rang, Angeline hit the button to let Mr. Bone into the apartment building. Then she waited by the door for Mr. Bone to come out of the elevator. "Over here, Mr. Bone," she called. "Come on in," she invited. Even though she knew it meant she'd get into trouble, she remained absolutely delighted to see her just the same. "This is my father." Abel and Mr. Bone shook hands. Mr. Persepolis," said Mr. Bone. "Mr. Bone," said Abel. There are some people who are so cold and unfeeling, like reflections in a mirror, that they might as well be imaginary, but as Abel shook Mr. Bone's hand, he could feel her warmth and he could see in her face. And as they talked, he could hear it in her voice. "Call me Melissa," she said. Abel was glad her name wasn't Howard or Robert or Frank. He thought Melissa Bone was a nice name. He told her to call him Abel. "Call me Angeline," laughed Angeline. Melissa sat on the sofa. "That's my bed," said Angeline. "It folds out." Melissa smiled. "It's very comfortable." "And now what can I do for you, Mr. Melissa?" Abel asked. His tie was strangling him. He didn't know why he had put it on in the first place. "Maybe it would be better if we could talk alone," she suggested. Angeline was sent to her father's bedroom. She took her book with her, although she had no intention of reading it. She sat with her ear next to the door and listened. "I don't know where to begin," said Melissa. "Has Angeline told you where she's been in the past week?" "Where she's been?" Abel repeated. "She hasn't been in school." "Or she hasn't been in school?" "No," said Abel as he turned and looked toward his bedroom door. "No, I didn't know that." "She's been going to the aquarium," Melissa informed him. Angeline knew, of course, that Mr. Bone would know she hadn't been in school. What she couldn't figure out was how Mr. Bone knew she'd been going to the aquarium. It amazed her. "I only know what Angeline's teacher, Mrs. Hardlick, told me about it," said Melissa. "And to be perfectly honest, I don't believe half the things that Margaret Hardlick says." She then related to Abel Angeline's final act as Secretary of Trash, and the subsequent note that Angeline was supposed to have signed by her mother. "Her mother's been dead for over 5 years, said Abel. His tie was driving him crazy. He stretched his neck in all directions. "Excuse me? Would you mind if I took off my tie?" "Oh, yes, terribly," she answered. "Oh, all right, then," said Abel. He kept it on. Melissa laughed. "I'm kidding," she told him. Abel smiled foolishly. He took off his tie and hurled it across the room. He unbuttoned the top button of his shirt and let out an exaggerated sigh of relief. "Much better," he said. "I could never figure out why men wear those things in the first place," said Melissa. "And they say that women are such slaves of fashion." Maybe that was why she called herself Mr. Bone, thought Abel. It was some kind of women's liberation. He returned to the topic of conversation. "I never saw the note," he said. "I know," said Melissa. "Angeline stuffed it under a bus seat. Incredible," thought Angeline from behind the door. "Mr. Bone knows everything." "I told Mrs. Hardlick that I would speak to her mother, to you, in lieu of the note," said Melissa. "Well, thank you," said Abel. "I'll see that Angeline is punished." Melissa and Angeline each winced at that. "Please don't get me wrong," said Melissa. "She's your daughter, but I didn't come all the way over here so that Angeline would be punished." On the other side of the door, Angeline wiped her forehead. "Way to go, Mr. Bone," she whispered. "I'm all ears," said Abel. Melissa smiled at the expression. "I guess I just wanted you to be aware of the situation," she said. Excuse me. "Well, I'm aware of the situation," said Abel. "Angeline gets herself into lots of situations, and I blow every one of them." Judging by Angeline, said Melissa, you must be doing something right. Really? Said Abel. You think so? Even though she's been going to the aquarium? Melissa laughed. If I had Margaret Hardlick for a teacher, I'd go to the aquarium too. Abel smiled. Really? Okay, so now what do I do? What do you think about switching Angeline to my class? Behind the door, Angeline vigorously nodded her head. That's the 5th grade, isn't it? Asked Abel. Melissa said it was. I don't know, said Abel. No offense, but I hate to see her move backwards. She has so much potential. That's what really scares me. I don't want to do anything to blow it. I hate to send her back a grade just because you're such a pretty, he stumbled over his words, a pretty nice person, teacher, he smiled. Thank you, Abel. I think you're nice also. Angeline beamed. Abel took a deep breath. Okay, fine, he said. What happens next year, he asked. She'll be in 6th grade all over again, won't she, with Mrs. Hardlick? Who knows where she'll be next year, said Melissa. Right now she's smart enough to be in college, yet emotionally she needs to be with kids her own age. That's the whole problem. She doesn't fit anywhere. Angeline agreed with that. She was always on the outside, even now, behind the door. So why the 5th grade, Abel asked. Because, Melissa said, shrugging modestly, because like you said, she smiled, I'm a nice teacher. Yes, I bet you are, said Abel. They decided to leave it up to Angeline. She bolted out from behind the door. I want to be in Mr. Bone's class, she announced. Okay, fine, said Abel. Mr. Bone told Angeline she might have to wait a couple of days before all the administrative stuff could be completed. In the meantime, she would have to return to Mrs. Hardlick's class. Okay, fine, said Angeline. It didn't occur to any of them at the time that Angeline might have been better off waiting at home, or at the aquarium, or any place else, except Mrs. Hardlick's class until the administration stuff could be completed. They didn't think that 1 or 2 days would matter. And that's the end of chapter 14.